under the relentless glare of a late summer sun that hung low in the sky like a watchful eye, casting long shadows across the endless stretch of cracked asphalt that wound through golden fields of ripening wheat and forgotten farmsteads. Marcus Hale guided his sleek black Harley-Davidson with the steady hand of a man who had long ago learned to navigate chaos without flinching. The engine's deep, throaty rumble vibrated through his bones, a familiar companion that drowned out the whispers of doubt that sometimes crept in during these solitary rides, reminders of the sand-swept dunes of distant battlefields where trust was a luxury few could afford, and survival hinged on split-second decisions made in the haze of dust and adrenaline. At 42, with a salt and pepper beard meticulously trimmed to frame a jawline etched by years of discipline, Hale was no stranger to the open road. It was his sanctuary, a place where the weight of his 20 years in the United States Marine Corps felt lighter, unburdened by the formalities of rank or the invisible scars that lingered like ghosts in his quiet moments. Today, he was simply heading home to the small coastal town where his aging mother still tended a garden of roses that bloomed defiantly against the salt air, carrying nothing more than a weathered leather saddlebag stuffed with a change of clothes, a dog-eared novel by Hemingway for the long hauls, and that old satellite phone, a relic from his days leading reconnaissance teams through hostile territories, its compact frame now tucked away as a mere precaution, though its embedded tracking chip hummed silently with protocols he hoped he'd never need to invoke. The wind whipped at his leather jacket, carrying the faint scent of earth and exhaust, and for a fleeting moment, Hale allowed himself a rare smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his deep brown eyes, as he crested a gentle rise and spotted the distant silhouette of a roadside checkpoint ahead, its flashing blue lights a minor interruption in what promised to be an uneventful journey. At the checkpoint, a weathered pull-off flanked by chain-link fences tangled with wild kudzu and rusted signs warning of speed traps, Sheriff Harlan Voss slouched against the hood of his dusty patrol cruiser, nursing the dregs of a lukewarm thermos of black coffee that tasted more of bitterness than caffeine. Voss, pushing 50 with a paunch that strained the buttons of his ill-fitting uniform shirt and a face mapped by deep furrows from too many sleepless nights chasing shadows that never quite materialized into promotions or respect from the brass upstate, flicked the butt of his cigarette into the gravel with a practiced disdain, watching the ember die under his boot heel. Beside him stood Assistant Deputy Lena Ruiz, a fresh-faced recruit of 26, whose enthusiasm for the badge still shone through her neatly pressed khakis and the ponytail that swung like a pendulum as she jotted notes in her logbook, her dark eyes wide with the naive optimism of someone who believed the job was about helping folks, not judging them at first glance. Voss had been with the county force for nearly 2 decades, his file a patchwork of commendations for minor busts overshadowed by unresolved complaints, whispers of overzealous stops, rough handling during arrests, and a pattern of assumptions that painted entire profiles based on fleeting impressions rather than fact. He straightened as Hale's Harley approached in his rearview mirror, the bike's chrome accents catching the light like a beacon, and a familiar knot of suspicion twisted in his gut. "Well, look what we got here," Voss muttered, his voice gravelly from years of chain smoking, laced with that undercurrent of skepticism he'd honed like a blade. "Fancy ride for a solo traveler. Bet it's got a story we need to hear." Ruiz glanced up, her pen pausing mid-stroke, but she said nothing, her instincts urging caution even as Voss keyed the microphone on his radio, the static crackle breaking the humid air like a warning shot. Hale eased off the throttle as the patrol lights bathed his bike in staccato pulses of red and blue, the sudden intrusion pulling him back from his reverie with the sharpness of a drill sergeant's bark. He signaled smoothly, guiding the Harley to the shoulder with the precision of muscle memory, the kickstand deploying with a metallic thunk against the sun-baked earth that radiated heat through the soles of his boots. Keeping his hands visible on the handlebars, palms open, fingers splayed in that universal gesture of compliance drilled into him during endless safety briefings, Hale waited, his posture relaxed yet alert, the way he'd positioned himself countless times in high-stakes negotiations where one wrong move could escalate everything. The fields around them stretched out in undulating waves of green and gold, dotted with the occasional silo standing sentinel like ancient monoliths, and in the distance, a hawk circled lazily on thermals, oblivious to the human drama unfolding below. Voss approached from the driver's side, his boots crunching gravel with deliberate heaviness, hand hovering near his holster, not out of fear but habit, a prop in the theater of authority he played out daily. "License and registration," Voss demanded, his tone flat and edged with impatience, eyes narrowing behind mirrored aviators that reflected Hale's calm face back at him like a distorted mirror. Slowly now. Wouldn't want any misunderstandings. Understood, officer, Hale replied evenly, his voice a low baritone smoothed by years of de-escalating tense situations in the field, where words were often the first line of defense. He moved with exaggerated care, reaching into his inner jacket pocket for his wallet, the leather creaking softly under his fingers. Extracting the documents, his driver's license, crisp and current, and the vehicle registration printed on heavy stock from the DMV, he extended them without flourish, his gaze steady but non-confrontational, locking briefly with Voss's shielded stare. Ruiz hung back a few paces, her notepad at the ready, but something in Hale's demeanor, a quiet assurance that spoke of unseen battles won, made her pause, her free hand unconsciously fiddling with her radio strap. Voss snatched the papers, holding them up to the light as if expecting them to dissolve into counterfeit smoke, his lips pursing in that telltale sign of preconceived judgment. Marine Corps veteran, huh? He read aloud, the words dripping with a skepticism that bordered on mockery, his free hand gesturing vaguely at the Harley. 20 years. Impressive. Where you headed with all this? Hardware? Looks like it belongs in a showroom, not out here hauling who knows what. Hale met the implication head-on without rising to it, his response measured like a sniper's breath. Just heading home to visit family, sir. Long ride from the city, nothing more than that. Everything's in order if you check the VIN. But Voss wasn't interested in verification. He was fishing, casting lines into waters muddied by his own unexamined biases, the kind that festered in small-town patrols where boredom bred suspicion and difference became a red flag. He handed the documents back with a flick of the wrist, then circled the bike like a mechanic appraising a faulty engine, his gloved fingers trailing over the custom exhaust pipes and leather saddle, as if ownership itself were a crime. "Step off the bike," he ordered abruptly, his voice rising a notch, the command laced with an authority that brooked no questions. Hale complied without hesitation, swinging his leg over the seat in a fluid motion honed by parachute jumps and obstacle courses, planting his boots firmly on the ground and raising his hands to shoulder height, palms out. "Mind if I ask the reason for the stop, officer?" he inquired politely, his tone respectful yet firm, the subtle steel beneath it a remnant of command positions where he'd led squads through ambushes without flinching. Voss's response was a bark, devoid of explanation. "Routine check. We've had reports of suspicious activity on this stretch, folks, moving goods they shouldn't. You fit the description." It was a lie, thin as the humid air between them, no such reports logged in the dispatch logs Ruiz had reviewed that morning, but Voss wielded it like a club, nodding to her as if she were complicit in the script. "Bags on the seat. Open it up, Ruiz. Let's see what our veteran's carrying." Ruiz hesitated for a split second, her eyes flicking to Hale's face, strong features softened by faint laugh lines, a small tattoo of the eagle, globe, and anchor peeking from his sleeve cuff, and felt a pang of unease twist in her chest, the first crack in her rookie's armor. But training kicked in, and she stepped forward, unzipping the saddlebag with careful fingers, the zipper's teeth parting like reluctant confessions. Inside lay the innocuous contents of a traveler's life. Folded jeans smelling faintly of motor oil, a toiletry kit with travel-sized essentials, that Hemingway paperback dog-eared at the chapter on Grace Under Pressure, and a small velvet pouch containing his service medals, ribbons faded from desert suns, polished brass catching the light like distant stars. Voss leaned in, his shadow eclipsing Ruiz's hands, and snatched the pouch, spilling its treasures across the dusty shoulder in a cascade of clinking metal and colored silk. "What's all this?" he scoffed, picking up a purple heart with thumb and forefinger as if it were costume jewelry. "Souvenirs from a costume party. Looks mighty official for a guy rolling solo on a bike that screams hot property." Hale's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the insult landing like shrapnel on old wounds. But he kept his voice level, a commander's poise masking the surge of frustration. "Those are my earned decorations, sir, from deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd appreciate if you'd handle them with care. They represent lives saved, missions completed." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken histories, but Voss only snorted, kicking at a loose ribbon with his boot, sending it skittering into the gravel like discarded confetti from a forgotten parade. Across the road, at a ramshackle gas station with pumps rusted from years of neglect and a sign flickering "Eat" in neon defiance, a small crowd began to gather, farmhands pausing their midday break, a family in a battered pickup slowing to gawk, and old Mrs. Elena Ramirez, the station's matronly proprietor with silver-streaked hair pinned back under a bandana, wiping her hands on her apron as she stepped out onto the porch. Her sharp eyes, honed by decades of observing the ebb and flow of strangers through her doors, narrowed at the scene, recognizing the familiar rhythm of overreach she'd witnessed too many times in this forgotten corner of the county. "Not again," she murmured to a young pump jockey beside her, her voice thick with the accent of border towns long left behind. The kid, barely out of high school with acne scars and a phone perpetually glued to his palm, pulled it out instinctively, thumb swiping to camera mode as the lens zoomed in on the unfolding tableau, the shutter clicking silently in burst mode. The video captured it all. Voss's aggressive stance, Hale's measured compliance, the medals glinting traitorously in the dust, the raw footage that would soon ignite digital campfires far beyond this rural impasse. Ruiz delved deeper into the bag, her fingers brushing against the cool metal of the satellite phone nestled in a side pocket, its matte black casing unmarked, save for faint serial etchings that screamed government issue. She lifted it gingerly, turning it over in her palm, the weight of it evoking images of spy thrillers she'd binge-watched on late nights, though this was no fiction. "Sheriff, this looks like specialized gear," she ventured, her voice tentative, laced with the unease of someone sensing the ground shifting beneath her feet. Voss's head snapped around, and he yanked the device from her grasp, his thick fingers fumbling over the buttons in a mock inspection before hurling it to the asphalt with a crack that echoed like a gunshot in the still air. The screen shattered into a spiderweb of fractures, but deep within its circuits, the emergency beacon, triggered not by the impact but by the biometric spike in Hale's cortisol levels synced via his wristwatch, flickered to life, a silent SOS pinging satellites overhead with encrypted coordinates precise to within meters. "Specialized, or just toys for folks who think they're above the law?" Voss growled, grinding the heel of his boot into the fragments for good measure, shards scattering like brittle ice. Hale watched the destruction unfold, a flicker of sorrow crossing his features, not for the gadget, replaceable in a Pentagon supply chain, but for the casual disregard it represented, the erasure of a tool that had once connected him to brothers in arms, pulling them from the brink in moonless nights. "That was military property, officer," he stated flatly, his tone shifting from conciliatory to documented, each word catalogued in the mental ledger he'd kept since boot camp. "Issued for secure comms during ops. I need to make a call, protocol requires it." Voss's laugh was a bark, devoid of humor, as he unclipped the handcuffs from his belt, the metal links jangling like mocking chains in the heavy air. "A call? You'll make it from lockup. Hotshot. Hands behind your back now." Hale complied, pivoting slowly, the rough twist of his arms a familiar discomfort from field exercises, though the cold bite of steel against his wrists carried a sharper sting here, on home soil where the enemy wore badges instead of balaclavas. Voss shoved him toward the cruiser with more force than necessary, Hale's shoulder clipping the doorframe, a dull thud that drew a sharp intake from Ruiz, who averted her eyes, her stomach churning with the moral vertigo of complicity. "Easy, Sheriff," she murmured, but Voss shot her a glare that silenced further protest, bundling Hale into the back seat where the vinyl stuck to his jacket in the trapped heat, the partition between them a transparent barrier that felt oppressively final. As the cruiser lurched forward, gravel spitting from under the tires, Voss glanced in the rear view, catching Hale's unflinching gaze, those eyes, steady as a sniper's scope, holding no rage, only a profound, weary resolve that unnerved him more than any outburst could. "You think you're special, don't you? Parading around on that bike like you own the road. Well, in my county, rules apply to everyone, especially types like you stirring up trouble." Hale leaned back against the headrest, the cuffs chafing but ignored, and checked his watch with a subtle flex of his fingers, its face innocuous to the untrained eye but alive with a countdown. 4 minutes, 52 seconds until full alert status. "You have 5 minutes to reconsider, Sheriff," he said softly, the words not a threat but a forecast, delivered with the calm certainty of a man who'd called in airstrikes on worse odds. Voss chuckled, accelerating onto the highway, the fields blurring into streaks of gold. Oblivious to the digital ripple his actions had set in motion, 40 miles away, in the fortified bowels of Camp Lejeune's command center, a labyrinth of humming servers and tactical displays lit by the cool glow of monitors, a soft chime pierced the rhythmic hum of cooling fans, drawing the attention of Petty Officer Second Class Jamal Torres, the on-duty comms specialist whose shift was winding down with the monotony of routine diagnostics. The alert popped on his screen. Priority signal. Asset hail. M. Biometric distress. Confirmed. Location. County Road 47. Mile marker 100 Do. Protocol Alpha engaged. Torres's heart rate spiked, fingers flying across the keyboard to verify the ping legitimate, encrypted with Hale's unique key, the kind reserved for high-value personnel whose capture could compromise ongoing ops even in retirement. Command, this is Com's emergency beacon from Hale. Possible detainment by local LEOs, he announced into his headset, voice steady despite the adrenaline dump, years of sim drills kicking in like second nature. The room erupted into controlled frenzy, chairs scraping back, officers converging on the central holotable where a 3D map materialized, red blips marking Hale's cruiser in real time via orbital feeds. Colonel Elena Vargas, Hale's former CEO, a wiry woman in her late 40s with a scar tracing her temple from a roadside IED and a reputation for turning impossible extractions into textbook successes, strode in from an adjacent briefing room, her uniform jacket slung over one arm, eyes narrowing at the display. "Talk to me, Torres. What's the sitrep?" "Ma'am." Signal indicates physical restraint, no vitals compromise, but escalation probable. He's carrying legacy gear. If they've tampered. Vargas cut him off with a raised hand, her mind already 3 steps ahead, piecing together the implications. Hale wasn't just any vet. He was the guy who'd orchestrated the Hellman pullout under fire, his after-action reports still taught in OCS as case studies in restraint under pressure. Scramble response team full convoy, 50 Humvees, MP detachment. Air overwatch if we can spin up a bird. And get me the governor's office on the line. This stays contained until we're boots on ground. Alarms whooped softly, Hangar Bay 3 springing to life as mechanics swarmed the idling fleet, diesel engines coughing to roaring vitality, the metallic tang of fuel mingling with the salt breeze off the Atlantic. Vargas paused at the door, glancing back at the map where the red blip inched toward the county seat. "Hale's one of ours. We don't leave brothers hanging not on our watch." Back in the cruiser, the miles ticked by in tense silence broken only by the crackle of Ruiz's radio relaying mundane dispatch chatter. Lost dog in Sector 3, fender bender on main while Voss drummed his fingers on the wheel, a smug satisfaction settling over him like a well-worn coat. The town limits loomed ahead, a faded welcome to Elmwood, Pop 4200 sign tilting drunkenly by the roadside, its paint peeled by winters past, and beyond it, the squat brick facade of the sheriff's station with its single flagpole drooping under the heat. Ruiz stole glances at Hale in the mirror, his profile etched against the passing scenery, strong nose, close-cropped hair graying at the temples, and wondered at the stories behind the man, the deployments that had forged such unyielding poise. "Sheriff, maybe we should run his plates through NCIC before booking," she suggested softly, clinging to procedure like a lifeline. Voss waved her off. "Plates are clean, it's the rider that's the issue. Trust me, kid. I've seen his type before. Always got an angle." Hale, overhearing, shifted slightly, the cuffs a constant reminder, and spoke into the quiet. "Your partner's right, Sheriff. A quick check would clear this up, save everyone time." But Voss only accelerated, the station's parking lot materializing like a judgment hall, a scattering of other cruisers parked haphazardly under sodium lamps that buzzed faintly even in daylight. As they pulled in, tires crunching over loose stones, a handful of locals had already clustered near the entrance. Word travels fast in places like Elmwood, carried on the wings of Ruiz's earlier radio squawk and the kid's viral clip, now bouncing through group chats with captions like, "Another bad stop? Mrs. Ramirez had driven over in her ancient Chevy, thermos of strong coffee in hand, her presence a quiet anchor amid the murmurs. Voss killed the engine, yanking open his door with a creak, and hauled Hale out by the elbow, the veteran's balance impeccable despite the restraint. Inside, processing awaits, Hale planted his feet, scanning the growing assembly with a tactician's eye faces etched with concern. A few phones still recording and noted the time. 3 minutes flat. The station doors swung open under Voss's push, swallowing them into the cool, stale air of linoleum floors and flickering fluorescence, the holding cell's bars glinting like teeth in the dim light. Ruiz trailed her steps heavier now, the weight of complicity pressing down as she logged the intake, her pen trembling slightly on the form. Hale settled onto the bench, the metal cold against his back, and closed his eyes briefly, visualizing the convoy's approach. Humvees thundering down I-95, Vargas at the helm, a tide of green steel rising to meet the tide of injustice. Outside, the first distant rumbles echoed like thunder on the horizon, the earth trembling faintly under the advance of 50 vehicles bearing the Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. Not an invasion, but a reclamation, the system's own machinery grinding back to life in defense of one of its own. And in that moment, as the clock ticked inexorably toward zero, Hale knew the road ahead, though fraught, would bend toward reckoning, as it always did for those who held the line. The air inside the station carried the faint, institutional scent of stale coffee and printer ink, mingled with the sharper tang of sweat from Voss's agitated pacing in the adjacent bullpen, where deputies glanced up from their desks with mixtures of curiosity and wariness, sensing the shift in the wind from the murmurs filtering in from the lot. Hale sat motionless in the cell, his breathing regulated to the rhythm of tactical breaths. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 4, a technique that had steadied him through firefights and now anchored him against the rising tide of indignation that threatened to erode his composure. Memories flickered unbidden. The blistering heat of Fallujah's streets, where he'd coordinated extractions under mortar fire, pulling his squad from a collapsed safe house with nothing but a radio and grit. The quiet nights in Helmand province, satellite phone crackling with voices from home, a lifeline amid the isolation. This was child's play by comparison, a petty power play in a linoleum cage, but it stung deeper because it was home, the land he'd bled for, now questioning his right to traverse it freely. Ruiz appeared at the cell door, her face pale under the harsh lights, a styrofoam cup of water extended through the bars like an olive branch. Here. It's not much, but her voice trailed off, eyes darting to the hallway where Voss bellowed into his phone, demanding backup that wouldn't come in time. Hale accepted the cup with a nod, his cuffed hands managing a graceful sip. Appreciated, deputy. Name's Marcus, by the way. What's yours? Lena, she replied, the words slipping out like a confession, her guard cracking under the weight of his unflappable dignity. Look, I didn't sign up for this. The sheriff, he's got his ways, but I thought we were better. Hale set the cup down, his gaze holding hers with the gentle authority of a mentor. You are better. It's why you offered the water. Choices define us, Lena, not the badges. Outside, the rumbles grew to a roar, the ground vibrating as if the earth itself protested the affront, and Mrs. Ramirez cupped her hands to her ear, her weathered face lighting with vindication. Listen, that's them coming, the ones who know real service. The kid with the phone whooped, his video now at 10,000 views, comments flooding in from veterans groups and civil rights pages, a digital chorus amplifying the lone signal Hale had sent skyward. Voss burst through the doors, face flushed, radio clutched like a talisman. What the hell is that noise? Storm rolling in? But even as he spoke, the first Humvee crested the rise, its grille a maw of determination, followed by a phalanx of siblings in perfect echelon, dust plumes rising like battle banners. The lot filled with green behemoths, doors slamming open to disgorge Marines in crisp utilities, their movements synchronized poetry, perimeter secured, flanks covered, eyes scanning for threats that dissolved into civilian confusion. Vargas dismounted from the lead vehicle, her boots hitting pavement with purposeful thud, saluting the flagpole before striding forward, a sheaf of orders in hand. Sheriff Voss, Colonel Elena Vargas, United States Marine Corps. We're here for our asset. Release him immediately, or face federal charges under the Uniform Code. Voss sputtered, his bluster crumbling like dry clay as MPs flanked him, polite but unyielding. Inside, alarms blared softly, ironies underscore as Ruiz fumbled for the keys, her hands shaking not from fear but release. Hale rose as the cell swung open, stepping into the corridor with the grace of a man emerging from debrief, and met Vargas's eyes across the chaos, a silent semper fi passing between them like shared breath. The station transformed in minutes from sleepy outpost to command in excess, MPs cordoning the perimeter while tech swept for compromised data, their scanners beeping over the shattered phone remnants Ruiz had bagged as evidence of her own dawning regret. Hale conferred briefly with Vargas in the bullpen, voices low amid the flurry. "No injuries, ma'am. Just a lesson in local hospitality." She clapped his shoulder, the gesture brotherly. "We'll handle the lesson part. You good to ride?" He nodded, glancing at the window where his Harley waited, unscathed sentinel. As the convoy prepped to withdraw, Hale paused at the doors, turning to Ruiz with a final word. "You made the right call today, Lena. Keep making them." She nodded, tears unshed, watching as he mounted up, engine roaring to life, a symphony of vindication that drowned the sirens of doubt. The Humvees rolled out in reverse order, a retreating thunder, leaving Elmwood forever altered, the first ripples of a wave that would wash clean the stains of assumption, one accountable step at a time. And Hale, throttle twisted wide, leaned into the wind, the road ahead clear not just of checkpoints, but of illusions, carrying forward the unyielding spirit that no cuff or skepticism could chain. Yet even as the dust settled, the echoes lingered in the minds of those left behind, Voss slumping into his chair, the weight of impending inquiries pressing like an unseen yoke. Ruiz vowing silent reforms in her logbook entries, each word a brick in her evolving code. Mrs. Ramirez pouring coffee for the lingering crowd, her stories weaving Hale into local lore as the biker who summoned the sea.
Farther out, in the command center's afterglow, Torres logged the closeout, the screen fading to green asset secure, protocols archived for the next drill. Hale, miles down the highway now, felt the satellite phone's ghost in his pocket. A reminder that connection was fragile but unbreakable when forged in fire. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon in strokes of amber and crimson, and he accelerated, the Harley's song a hymn to resilience, carrying him homeward through fields that seemed a little less shadowed, a little more open to the truth of who wrote their paths. The distant rumble began as a low murmur, like the growl of an approaching storm that the farmers in Elmwood had learned to dread during harvest season, when sudden downpours could turn fertile fields into quagmires of regret. But this was no natural fury, it was mechanical, relentless, a symphony of diesel engines harmonizing in perfect cadence. As they crested the low hills bordering the town,
their green hulls slicing through the late afternoon haze like arrows loosed from a hidden archer's bow. Inside the sheriff's station, a squat edifice of faded red brick that squatted stubbornly on the edge of Main Street like an aging sentinel too weary to stand tall, the air hung thick with the residue of routine injustices. The faint metallic tang of overbrewed coffee seeping from a pot left unattended in the break room, the muffled clatter of keyboards from deputies processing parking tickets and noise complaints, and the underlying hum of fluorescent bulbs flickering overhead, casting erratic shadows that danced across scuffed linoleum floors worn smooth by the tread of countless uneasy footsteps. Harlan Voss paced the narrow corridor leading to the holding area, his heavy boots thudding against the tiles with the irregular rhythm of a man wrestling with the gnawing uncertainty that had begun to burrow into his chest since bundling that biker into the cruiser less than an hour ago. His mind replayed the stop in fragmented loops, the veteran's unflinching gaze, the way those medals had spilled like accusations across the gravel, the rookie's hesitant glances that spoke of questions he didn't want aired, and he rubbed the back of his neck, slick with a sheen of sweat that had nothing to do with the building's faulty air conditioning, muttering under his breath about troublemakers thinking they're untouchable, as if the words could shore up the crumbling walls of his authority. Lena Ruiz sat at the intake desk just beyond the bullpen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard where Hale's details stared back at her in stark black-type Marcus Hale, age 42, address in a quiet suburb upstate, no priors. Military discharge honorable, her stomach twisting into knots as she contemplated the form's final line. Reason for detention. Suspicion of improper vehicle operation, a phrase so bland it bordered on farce, and she wondered, not for the first time that shift, how many others had been reduced to checkboxes under Voss's watchful eye, their stories filed away like yesterday's weather reports. The station's front windows, smudged with fingerprints and the occasional bird strike, offered a view of the parking lot where Hale's Harley stood sentinel under the lengthening shadows of the town's single oak tree, its chrome accents still gleaming defiantly, a silent testament to journeys uninterrupted until today. And Ruiz found herself drawn to it, imagining the roads it had conquered, the freedoms it symbolized that felt increasingly distant in this line of work where procedure often blurred into prejudice. The rumble swelled, infiltrating the station like an uninvited guest, vibrating through the foundations and rattling the loose blinds that clacked against the sills, drawing puzzled glances from the deputies in the bullpen who paused mid-sip from their mugs or mid-scroll on their phones, exchanging shrugs that masked a growing unease as the sound coalesced into something unmistakably orchestrated, a convoy, not the sporadic rumble of logging trucks from the county backroads, but a formation, disciplined and immense, bearing down on Elmwood with the inevitability of a tide turning. Outside, on the cracked sidewalk lining the lot, the small cluster of locals who'd trickled in after Mrs. Ramirez's urgent calls to neighbors' farmwives with aprons dusted in flour, a mechanic wiping grease from his hands on a rag, a pair of teenagers on bikes who detoured from their paper routes froze in place, their casual chatter dying as the first Humvee crested the intersection at the end of the block, its angular frame cutting through the air with purposeful menace, followed by another, and another, until the street filled with a rolling sea of olive-drab vehicles, 50 strong, their tires humming over asphalt in tight columns that evoked memories of newsreels from distant wars, though this was no invasion but a precision response, headlights piercing the dust like accusatory fingers. Mrs. Ramirez, stationed at the forefront with her arms crossed over her ample bosom, her silver-streaked bun unyielding as the convictions that had carried her through raising 5 children and running that gas station through economic storms, lifted her chin and pointed triumphantly toward the lead vehicle, her voice carrying over the din like a town crier's proclamation. "See? I told you folks that man's no ordinary rider. The cavalry's here, and not a minute too soon." The teenagers whooped, pulling out their phones to capture the spectacle, fingers flying to live-stream the arrival with breathless commentary. "Yo, Marines in Elmwood? This is wild." While the mechanic leaned against his truck, a slow grin spreading as he recognized the eagle emblem on the doors, whispering to a nearby farmer about buddies from his own service days who'd spun yarns of such rapid mobilizations, though none quite like this, a full battalion's worth rolling into a speck on the map for one man's sake. Voss burst through the side door into the lot, his face a mask of incredulity twisted with the first flickers of alarm, radio clutched in one meaty fist as he barked into it for dispatch. "What in blazes is this? Get the state boys down here now." But the static-laced response from a harried operator up in the county seat offered only garbled confirmations of military exercise that rang hollow even to his ears, drowned out by the synchronized growl of engines idling to a halt, doors swinging open with hydraulic sighs to unleash a cadre of Marines who moved with the fluid efficiency of a well-oiled machine, fanning out to establish a cordon around the station's perimeter without a word wasted, their utilities crisp under body armor, rifles slung low but ready, faces impassive masks of professional detachment that spoke volumes about protocols invoked far above local pay grades. Leading the vanguard was Colonel Elena Vargas, dismounting from the command Humvee with the poised grace of a conductor taking the podium, her frame compact yet commanding at 5'6", dark hair pulled into a severe bun that accentuated the sharp angles of her Latina features, a faint scar along her jawline, a souvenir from a botched patrol in Kandahar, adding an edge to her otherwise scholarly demeanor, for Vargas was as much tactician as warrior, her file thick with citations for innovative logistics that had kept supply lines open through insurgent gauntlets. She adjusted her cover with a gloved hand, scanning the scene with eyes that missed nothing, the gawking locals forming a semicircle at a respectful distance, the Harley's solitary vigil, Voss's blustering advance, and when her gaze locked on the sheriff, it held the cool precision of a laser sight, pinning him in place without a flicker of emotion. "Sheriff Harlan Voss," she stated, her voice carrying clear and authoritative over the settling dust. Not a question, but a confirmation drawn from dossiers already poured over en route. "I'm Colonel Elena Vargas, United States Marine Corps, 2nd Marine Division. We're here under executive protocol for the immediate release of Captain Marcus Hale. Any delay will be logged as obstruction. Federal repercussions follow swiftly." Voss halted mid-stride, his paunch heaving with indignant breaths, the radio slipping slightly in his grip as he processed the surreal tableau. Not 1 or 2 vehicles, but a phalanx that turned his sleepy lot into a forward operating base, Marines posting sentries at the gates while tech specialists unpacked cases of diagnostic gear, their movements a ballet of efficiency that made his deputies' haphazard parking look like child's play. Inside, the station's confines amplified the external clamor, the walls seeming to pulse with the vibration as Ruiz jumped from her chair, knocking over a stack of intake forms that fluttered to the floor like startled birds, her heart pounding a staccato rhythm against her ribs as she raced to the holding cell window, peering out to confirm what her ears had already betrayed: a full military rollout, the kind she'd only seen in training films about joint operations, not some backwater bust gone sideways. Hale, sensing the shift from his bench where he'd been methodically flexing his wrists against the cuffs to maintain circulation, a habit from long stakeouts, tilted his head, listening with the acuity of a point man in hostile territory, a faint curve touching his lips as the pieces aligned. The watch's silent alarm had done its work, threading the needle through bureaucratic red tape straight to Vargas's desk, where their shared history from boot camp brawls to Helmand dust-ups ensured no hesitation. "Sounds like company's arrived," he remarked to the empty air, his tone laced with dry amusement that masked the deeper relief uncoiling in his chest, for in that moment, the indignity of the cuffs felt trivial against the Brotherhood's unyielding response. A reminder that service didn't end with discharge papers but echoed in actions like this, a convoy mobilized not for glory but fidelity. Ruiz whirled at the sound of his voice, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and apology, fumbling for the master keyring on her belt that jingled like wind chimes in a gale. "Captain Hale, sir, they're here for you. I didn't know." The sheriff said it was standard procedure, but this, her words tumbled out in a rush, the rookie's idealism clashing with the harsh light of complicity, and she unlocked the cell with trembling fingers, the bolt sliding back with a resonant clunk that echoed her internal fracture. Hale rose fluidly, rolling his shoulders to ease the kinks, and extended his wrists through the bars. "No fault in procedure if it's followed right, Deputy Ruiz, but appreciation for seeing it through now, Keys?" She complied, the cuffs clicking open like a confession released, and as he rubbed the red welts blooming on his skin, he met her gaze with a nod that conveyed absolution without words. A small bridge extended across the chasm of the afternoon's errors. Voss stormed back inside, the screen door banging shut behind him like a judge's gavel, his face a thundercloud of denial and dawning dread as he barreled toward the holding area, deputies scattering from his path like leaves in a gust. "What the devil do they mean? Release him? This is my jurisdiction, federal overreach, or some stunt," he bellowed. But the bluster faltered when Vargas entered in his wake, her presence filling the cramped space like a shift in atmospheric pressure, two MPs flanking her with the unobtrusive vigilance of shadows, their sidearms holstered but postures screaming readiness. The bullpen fell into a hush, keyboards silenced, coffee mugs forgotten mid-air. As Vargas produced a tablet from her satchel, its screen glowing with declassified excerpts. Hale's service record scrolling in crisp lines, promotions earned in fire, commendations for valor that read like chapters from a hero's saga, and the kicker, a redacted line about ongoing consultancies that hinted at strings pulled from the highest echelons. "Captain Hale is a valued asset to national security. Sheriff, his detainment without cause, coupled with the unauthorized handling of classified comms gear, triggers automatic intervention. Sign here for the transfer of custody, or we'll proceed with a writ from the DOJ, already en route." Voss leaned over the tablet, his breath fogging the screen, squinting at the legalese that swam before his eyes like indictments from a bad dream, the Purple Heart citations glaring back at him as irrefutable as the convoy outside. And for a heartbeat, the room held its collective breath, the only sound the distant whir of a ceiling fan stirring papers on unattended desks. Ruiz hovered at the periphery, her notepad clutched like a shield, mentally cataloging every detail for the report she knew she'd file later, anonymous at first, perhaps, but truthful nonetheless, while Hale stepped forward, his frame dwarfing the tension, and placed a steadying hand on Voss's shoulder, the gesture paternal rather than punitive. "It's over, Sheriff. No need to dig deeper. Let it be a lesson for all of us, me included, on keeping a lower profile." Voss shrugged off the touch, but his pen scratched across the digital pad with reluctant strokes, the acknowledgement beeping acceptance like a door slamming on his pride. The release unfolded with the choreography of a changing of the guard. MPs escorting Hale through the station's bowels to the side exit where his Harley awaited. A quick once-over by a mechanic from the convoy confirming no sabotage, the engine purring to life under Hale's touch like an old friend rousing from slumber. Outside, the locals pressed closer, Mrs. Ramirez thrusting a paper bag of fresh tamales into Hale's hands. "For the road, mijo. You earned it," her eyes misty with the fierce pride of one who'd long advocated for the overlooked, while the teenagers cheered, their streams now hitting viral thresholds, comments pouring in from coast to coast, veterans sharing war stories, activists amplifying calls for accountability, a digital groundswell that turned a local mishap into a national conversation seed. Vargas conferred with Hale under the oak's dappled shade, their dialogue a clipped exchange of codes and concerns, gears recoverable, no data bleed confirmed. "You good?" "Solid, Colonel. OAU and the team next round's on me when you're stateside." Before she signaled the withdrawal, the Humvees revving in unison, a retreating wave that left the lot scarred with tire tracks like footprints of giants. But the convoy didn't depart empty-handed. A pair of suits from the FBI's Civil Rights Unit, alerted by the satellite ping's escalation chain, arrived in an unmarked sedan just as the last vehicle idled, Special Agent Carla Nguyen flashing credentials that outranked Voss's protests, her partner, a burly ex-cop named Harlan, irony's nod, unfurling a laptop to pull up the kid's video, frame by frozen frame dissecting the stop's cascade of missteps. "Sheriff, we'll need your body cam footage and an interview. This one's got legs. Patterns like yours don't vanish overnight." Voss deflated visibly, sinking onto a bench by the entrance, the fight leaching from him as Ruiz approached tentatively, offering a water bottle she'd fetched from the cooler. "Sir, maybe it's time for that vacation you mentioned." He took it with a grunt, the gesture a fragile olive branch in the gathering twilight, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in strokes of bruised purple and lingering gold. As Hale throttled away, the Harley's exhaust, a fading growl that blended with the convoy's departure, Elmwood exhaled collectively, the air lighter yet charged with the aftershocks of revelation, deputies whispering in huddles about policy reviews sure to follow, locals dispersing with tales that would fuel diner conversations for months, Mrs. Ramirez already dialing her sister in the next county to spread the gospel of the biker who summoned steel from the skies. Ruiz watched Hale's taillight vanish around the bend, a resolve hardening in her chest like cooling alloy. Tomorrow, she'd request a transfer to investigations, chasing truths instead of shadows, her logbook entry for the night a vow scrawled in margins. Witness to change participant next time. Voss, alone on the bench as stars pricked the emerging night, stared at the empty lot, the weight of 50 Humvees lingering in his bones, not as threat but mirror, reflecting back the fractures in a system he'd long propped up with willful blindness. Farther out, in the convoy's lead vehicle barreling toward base, Vargas reviewed after-action notes on her tablet, a satisfied nod escaping as she keyed a secure line. Asset secure. Recommend enhanced vet support protocols. Local LEOs need bridging. Hale, wind in his face and tamales warm in his pack, felt the road reclaim him. The incident not a scar but a spur, propelling him toward home with renewed purpose, the horizon unfolding not as endpoint but invitation, where conversations with his mother over rose-pruned dinners would weave this day's threads into a tapestry of quiet advocacy, one ride, one reckoning at a time. The night deepened, Elmwood's street lamps flickering on like hesitant beacons, illuminating a town forever altered, not shattered, but reshaped, its foundations tested and found wanting, yet resilient in the promise of dawn's unyielding light. Yet the ripples extended beyond the immediate, threading through the veins of a broader network where Hale's signal had first ignited. Back at Camp Lejeune, the comms room buzzed with debrief chatter, Petty Officer Torres logging the ops metrics response time under 5 minutes, 0 escalations, asset integrity, 100% his console alive with pings from allied units, sharing similar tales of off-base frictions, a mosaic of minor affronts coalescing into calls for systemic tweaks. In Washington, a junior staffer in the DOJ's Oversight Division flagged the incident for the morning brief. The video's metrics now cresting 100,000 views appended as Exhibit A, prompting quiet discussions in marble halls about expanding vet liaisons to rural outposts, bridges built from shared service rather than suspicion. Hale, miles from Elmwood now, pulled over at a scenic overlook where the highway kissed the sea, the waves crashing below in rhythmic affirmation, and powered on a backup burner phone to text his mother. Delayed but en route. Dinner stories incoming. Her reply buzzed back swift. Tables set. Proud of you always. He pocketed it, gazing out at the inky expanse where stars mirrored on water, contemplating the fragility of freedoms hard won, the way a single stop could summon a storm yet yield to calmer seas through voices raised in unity. Ruiz's tentative stand, Ramirez's unyielding witness, even Voss's grudging signature a crack in the edifice. The Harley idled patiently, ready for the next leg, and Hale swung aboard, the engine song a vow renewed. Forward, always forward, through shadows that yielded to the collective gleam of accountability's emerging dawn. 6 months had slipped by since the thunderous arrival of those 50 Humvees had etched itself into Elmwood's collective memory like a brand on weathered leather, transforming a sleepy crossroads into a reluctant epicenter of introspection and evolution, where the once faded welcome sign now bore fresh paint and an added line, a community reimagined courtesy of a grant from a veterans advocacy fund that had latched onto the story's viral tailwind, turning local lore into a blueprint for quieter revolutions elsewhere. Marcus Hale, no longer the solitary rider cutting through rural vales, but a figure woven into the fabric of tentative progress, occupied a corner office in the repurposed community center on Elmwood's outskirts, a modest space that had once hosted bake sales and bingo nights, now outfitted with modular desks and whiteboards scrawled with flowcharts for equity and enforcement workshops. The air scented with the earthy aroma of fresh printed reports, and the faint, optimistic tang of whiteboard markers uncapped too hastily. At 32, at 42 still, though the lines around his eyes had softened from the steady rhythm of purposeful days rather than restless nights, Hale leaned back in his swivel chair, the leather creaking like an old comrade settling in, as he reviewed the latest metrics from the county's reform dashboard. Complaint volumes down by 38%, diversity hires up in the latest academy class, and a pilot program for de-escalation simulations drawing interest from neighboring precincts. All threads pulled from the spool of that fateful stop. Though he'd never frame it as his doing, Hale preferred the collective we, a pronoun that echoed the squadroom ethos where credit diffused like smoke after a briefing. The center's windows overlooked a revitalized park where picnic tables now clustered under solar-powered lanterns, and on weekends, families gathered for barbecues that blurred lines between badges and civilians, officers manning grills in polo shirts while kids chased frisbees without the undercurrent of wariness that had once shadowed such scenes. It was here, amid the laughter and sizzle of burgers, that Hale had first sketched the outlines of his vision, napkin doodles evolving into the Bridge Builders Initiative, a series of town halls that paired vets with rookies over shared plates, fostering dialogues on the thin veil between protection and presumption, stories exchanged like currencies more valuable than any policy memo. Across town, in the fluorescent-lit aisles of the Elmwood Discount Mart, where fluorescent tubes hummed a monotonous lullaby over rows of canned goods and discount linens, Harlan Voss pushed a cart laden with surveillance monitors and night vision specs toward the stockroom, his once authoritative stride reduced to a measured shuffle that betrayed the ache in his knees from years of pounding pavement, though the deeper twinge came from the hollow echo of his reflection in the store's polished floors. A man stripped of the shield that had defined him, now relegated to watching over impulse buys and shoplifters with the detached vigilance of someone who'd traded command for compliance. The demotion had landed like a gut punch 6 weeks after the Humvees rolled out. His resignation letter typed on a borrowed laptop in the station's dim back office, words of personal reasons, masking the sting of internal affairs findings, a dossier of overlooked reports, witness statements from stops long buried, and that damning video looped in slow motion during the hearing, each frame a mirror to the biases he'd worn like invisible armor. Voss paused by the electronics aisle, fingering a stack of budget dashcams, the irony not lost on him, as he'd once scoffed at such gadgets for softening the job and allowed a wry smile to ghost his lips, for in the quiet hours before dawn, when the Mart's night shift dragged like a reluctant confession, he'd taken to reviewing his own archived footage, not for defense but dissection, pausing on moments where a hand lingered too long on a holster or a question veered into accusation, the exercise a self-imposed penance that chipped away at the fortress of denial he'd built over decades. It was during one such vigil that he'd stumbled into the support circle, a weekly gathering in the community center's basement led by a soft-spoken counselor from the State Bar Association, a circle of former officers nursing coffees and regrets, ex-cops turned consultants, deputies derailed by burnout, all circling the drain of what-ifs with the cautious candor of survivors swapping war stories. Voss had shown up unannounced, cap pulled low over eyes shadowed by fitful sleep, and when the facilitator prompted, "What brought you here?" he'd muttered about loose ends from Elmwood, but as sessions unfolded, the dam cracked. Tales of his father's badge, heavy as a millstone, passing down edicts of keep him in line without nuance. The promotions that eluded him not for merit but the quiet favoritism of old boys' networks. And that stop with Hale, replayed not as villainy but vulnerability, a fear of irrelevance masked as control. The group listened without judgment, nods rippling like affirmations, and in the sharing, Voss found not absolution but agency, a spark that led him to volunteer as a guest speaker at the Academy's ethics module, his gravelly voice steady as he recounted the convoy's arrival not as humiliation but hinge. The moment you realize the road's wider than your lane, that's when real patrolling begins. Lena Ruiz, meanwhile, had traded the weight of her utility belt for the lighter burden of textbooks and trial briefs, her days now a whirlwind of lectures in a sunlit auditorium at the State University 30 miles north, where ivy-cloaked halls buzzed with the fervor of future advocates dissecting case law and Fourth Amendment overreach, her notebook margins alive with annotations that bridged the gap between her old logs and new aspirations. Hale v. Voss, precedent for asset protection, scrawled beside rulings on unlawful seizures, a personal codex evolving from witness to warrior. The scholarship, seeded by a crowdfund sparked in the video's comment threads and matched by Hale's quiet donation from his consulting gigs advising defense contractors on personnel resilience, had arrived like a lifeline, her acceptance letter framed on the fridge in her cramped studio apartment. A beacon amid stacks of outlines and highlighters bled dry. Ruiz thrived in the rigor, her voice gaining volume in moot court battles where she channeled the hesitations of that roadside moment into impassioned closings. Compliance isn't consent. It's the first thread in a tapestry of trust we must weave anew. Evenings found her back in Elmwood, not as deputy but mentor, guest facilitating sessions for the bridge builders, where her fresh perspective, unscarred by the badge's blinders, challenged veterans to unpack the types they'd once profiled. Her questions, gentle probes like, "What story did that bike tell you before the rider spoke?" drawing out admissions that hung heavy, then lightened the air. Hale made time for her monthly check-ins at the seaside diner off Route 17, steam rising from mismatched mugs of clam chowder as they traded updates. Her latest win in a pro bono clinic, defending a migrant farmhand on trumped-up loitering charges, his push for a statewide vet hotline modeled on that satellite ping conversations that meandered like the waves crashing beyond the fogged windows, forging an unlikely alliance where past complicity yielded to present partnership. Ruiz's growth a quiet victory that affirmed Hale's belief in redemption's incremental arc. On a grander canvas, the Hale incident, or Elmwood pivot, as pundits dubbed it in op-eds that peppered the Sunday supplements, had unfurled into a national tapestry of policy shifts. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division expanding its lens to 12 sister counties with similar demographics, audits unearthing ledgers of disparate stops where black and brown drivers comprised 70% of searches yielding zero contraband. The data distilled into infographics that lit up congressional briefings like fireflies in a jar. Hale's testimony before the House Judiciary Subcommittee had aired live on C-SPAN to modest initial viewership that snowballed via clips dissected on morning shows, his baritone steady as he unrolled charts on easels borrowed from the center. These aren't anomalies, they're algorithms of assumption, hard-coded in training silos and shift room shorthand, his words landing with the precision of a well-aimed brief, prompting bipartisan murmurs of here from aisles divided by custom, but united in the optics of action. From those hearings sprouted the Guardian Protocols, a federal framework mandating joint task forces between local forces and military liaisons, annual simulations blending de-escalation with cultural competency modules drawn from vet-led curricula, and a national database for cross-jurisdictional complaints that pinged alerts like Hale's watch, ensuring no signal went solo. Hale, tapped as an advisory fellow by the initiative's steering committee, shuttled between D.C., Fly-ins and grassroots gigs, his Harley swapped for Amtrak's steady sway on East Coast runs, suitcases packed with notepads for sketching hybrid programs. What if we flipped the script, cops shadowing vets on ride-alongs, not as enforcers but learners? The question, posed in a packed hearing room under chandeliers that dripped light like deferred promises, elicited a senator's rare chuckle. Sounds like therapy with horsepower, but took root. Piloted in 5 states, where tandem patrols logged entries of eyes opened in journals that read like field notes from a shared frontier. From these seeds grew the League of Soldier Protectors, Hale's brainchild formalized in a leased loft above a Wilmington bike shop. Its walls papered with murals of intertwined roads and olive branches, a hub where vets from every branch converged, retired pilots trading flight sims for forum threads on biased blind spots, Navy corpsmen leading CPR workshops laced with rapport-building tips, all funneled through a hotline that lit up with queries from off-base encounters. Stopped for suspicious loitering outside the commissary, how do I document without escalating? The League's charter, co-drafted with Ruiz during a rain-lashed weekend retreat, emphasized not confrontation but connection. Its first outreach, a Rides for Rights convoy that looped through rural routes, Harleys and pickups in loose formation, stopping at diners for coffee clatches with sheriffs, engines off, as egos idled, conversations brewing over pie slices about the common ground of service under fire. Mrs. Ramirez, ever the linchpin, manned the loft's front desk on volunteer shifts, her ledger of anecdotes a goldmine for grant writers heard from a Gold Star mom in Ohio. Her boys' squad got pulled over mid-convoy, badges flashing like warnings, her stories fueling expansions to 15 chapters, each spawning satellite nodes like Elmwoods, where the park's picnic tables now hosted League mixers, laughter mingling with lectures on the subtle syntax of stops, not where you from, but safe travel's words as weapons or welcomes. Voss, in a twist that raised eyebrows at his first League meetup, showed up with a tray of store-bought donuts, his contribution a workshop on reading the room. From assumption to assessment, dry runs in the loft's back room where participants role-played scenarios, his gravelly debriefs. I missed the cues because I was chasing ghosts, earning nods that bridged old divides, a redemption arc etched not in headlines but handshakes. Elmwood itself bloomed in subtler strokes, the police station's brick facade softened by community murals, vibrant depictions of intertwined hands, badges and dog tags clasped in unity, painted by local artists under Ruiz's occasional guidance during school breaks, while the old checkpoint pull-off, once a gravel scar, sprouted a memorial garden with benches carved from reclaimed oak, plaques etched with quotes from Hale's testimony. The road belongs to all who pave it with principle. Chief Carla Jenkins, recruited from a reform-forward department in Raleigh with her doctorate in criminology and a resume unmarred by controversy, presided over a force reborn, mandatory rotations through League simulations, body cams synced to League databases for instant peer review, and quarterly trust audits, where residents like Ramirez tallied scores on town hall scorecards, her pen marking A for a recent foot patrol that lingered to chat rather than cite. The changes wove into daily rhythms a farmer's market booth where officers demoed non-lethal tools with kid-friendly flair, school assemblies blending dare with dialogues on fair stops, and even the Mart's aisles, where Voss's vigilance now included quiet interventions, steering a twitchy teen toward the League's youth arm before assumptions hardened into arrests. Hale marked these evolutions in private journals, entries penned on cross-country jaunts where the Harley reclaimed him on off days, throttle a metronome for reflections on fragility. Progress isn't linear. It's a switchback, each turn testing traction. One crisp autumn eve, he idled at the overlook where he'd paused post-convoy, salt air crisp with change, Ruiz's latest text buzzing clinic win, dismissed charges, family reunited a ripple affirming the weave, while Voss's group email circulated an invite to the next circle. Room for one more, your story's the spark. As dusk draped the coast in indigo veils, Hale twisted the grip, engine song a serenade to persistence, the League's map unfurling ahead with pins of promise, Ohio outposts, Texas task forces, a network neural, as the stars wheeling overhead each node, a node in the grander grid, where one rider's signal had sparked a symphony of shifts, not ending conflicts but echoing the eternal. Forward, together, through horizons ever widening. In the League's loft, As winter's first frost-etched patterns on window panes like delicate filigree, Hale facilitated a virtual roundtable linking Elmwood to a New Mexico chapter, screens aglow with faces from deserts to deltas, a Navajo vet sharing tales of border stops laced with cultural chasms, a Louisiana corpsman pitching apps for real-time rights, recaps the discussion meandering into midnight with the easy flow of fireside councils, ideas coalescing like dew. A podcast series from helmets to helmets, featuring Voss's gravelly guest spots on the cost of corners cut, his anecdotes laced with hard-won humor that humanized the headlines. Ruiz, patched in from her dorm's communal lounge amid stacks of torts, texts, chimed in with legalese leavening. Frame it as equity. Equity, not just equality. Outcomes over optics, her input a bridge from classroom to crossroads, earning Hale's offline nod. You're the future we fought for. Jenkins, too, tuned in sporadically, her feed flickering from the station's upgraded war room where dashboards tracked not just crimes but connections, citizen satisfaction metrics climbing like vines on a trellis, the chief's reports to council laced with league lingo. We've traded silos for symphonies. The Pivot's progeny extended to academies nationwide. Curricula infused with Elmwood case study sims recreating the stop sans the convoy, cadets debating what if the watch stayed silent. Outcomes tabulated in theses that quoted Hale's congressional quip, "Justice isn't armored arrival, it's everyday vigilance." Voss, in his Mart's quiet lulls, jotted notes for a memoir pitch badge in the rear-view ghostwritten sessions, with a league scribe turning regrets into roadmaps, chapters closing with the Humvee horizon, when steel mirrors soul. Ramirez, the loft's unofficial archivist, curated a scrapbook of clippings op-eds praising the protocols, thank yous from hotline heroes, its pages a patina of progress, shared at league galas where toasts rang out to the writer who revved reform. Hale, surveying it all from a Harley rumble through spring rains that washed winter's residue, felt the weave tighten, not conquest, but continuum, each thread Ruiz's resolve, Voss's vulnerability, Jenkins' justice, a strand in the stronger cord binding divides, the road not just traveled but transformed, horizons hailing not halts but harmonies in the endless ride.